Please, please use the hashtag NYU Metro Center to share your thoughts, questions, and reactions to this afternoon's conversation. Lastly, we will share relevant resources from our panelists in a post-event email. Now, let's get to know our esteemed panelists for this discussion. First up, Dr. Fabienne Doucet, Executive Director, Metropolitan Center for Research on Equity and the Transformation of Schools. She's also the Associate Professor of Early Childhood and Urban Education in the Department of Teaching and Learning at NYU Steinhardt School of Culture, Education, and Human Development. Fabienne is an affiliated faculty member of NYU Institute for Human Development and Social Change and the Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies. Our second panelist for today's conversation, LaRuth Gray, advocate, scholar, and author. Retired scholar in residence, Metropolitan Center for Research on Equity and the Transformation of Schools. Longtime Deputy Director of the Metropolitan Center for Urban Education. Superintendent of Abbott Union School District and Assistant Superintendent for the City School District of New Rochelle. Panelists, it's good to see both of you. Let us begin. Please share your name, a project that you are currently working on, as well as a description or anecdote describing your first interaction with NYU Metro Center. Fabienne, let's start with you.
Okay, thanks. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. It is such an honor for me to be on this panel with Dr. Gray. I am just so excited and thrilled and cannot wait for this conversation. So, my goodness, we have so many exciting things going on at the NYU Metro Center. It's actually hard to just kind of pin down one thing, but something that happened relatively recently. So I am part of a research team with NYU Metro Center's Center for Policy Research and Evaluation, which we commonly call the pre-team. So the pre-team has a grant from the Spencer Foundation to do this really exciting landscape analysis of organizations that support parent advocacy around the country. And it is really just trying to sort of get a sense of like, what are these organizations about? Where are they working? What are they working on? And then an important part of the study as well is trying to understand the intergenerational aspect of how these organizations work and how children are learning to be advocates because their parents are participating in these advocacy organizations. And so very recently, we released a report that is just the part one of this project and that summarizes what we have been learning so far from these amazing organizations and the work that they do. There was one more thing, Pharaoh. I feel like I'm missing something. Current project and?
Anecdote describing your first interaction with NYU Metro Center.
Okay. So I have been at NYU for 17 years as a faculty member. And when I first came to NYU, the executive director of the NYU Metro Center was Pedro Noguera, who had been a mentor of mine for quite some time. I was a postdoctoral fellow at the Harvard Graduate School of Education when Pedro was faculty there. And so we had, he was a mentor to me starting back then. And so when I came to NYU a few years later, he was here as well. And I remember just, hearing about Metro Center from him and then coming over and just seeing all these people hard at work, this bustling center of energy. And it was really exciting then, and it continues to be exciting now.
Dr. Gray, how would you describe your initial interaction with NYU Metro Center?
Well, my initial reaction actually was with Lamar Miller. And I was not at Metro Center at that time. I was actually in New Rochelle, and we were in the middle, and this is before the founding of Metro Center, and it was just on the cusp of it. I was the assistant superintendent and had, under the old Emergency School Aid Act, had put in a project for federal assistance in addressing two problems in the New Rochelle school system. One was called minority enrollment, which means that there were too many Black kids in one school, in our judgment at the time, and declining enrollment. And actually, the declining enrollment was the result of the increased number of students in certain schools. And so we had a very robust plan, and that's actually chronicled in a book that I wrote called What About Barnard? But what we found, and it's interesting about the parent advocacy that Dr. Doucet just talked about, because we actually called in Lamar Miller and his team to help us with a set of parents. We were going to close a school, which we call the front yard and the backyard of the school. The school was Barnard, and the front yard, as we called it, were absolutely gorgeous homes. At that time, they weren't $1 million homes, they are now. And at the back of the school, kind of up the hill and over the fence, was a school in low-income housing. And these young people had gone to school together. However, there was this flight, both middle-class Black flight, I want to make that clear, and white flight. And so we needed to address that, but the parents were up in arms on, both sets of parents. We called Dr. Miller and his team in to actually sit in the low-income housing kitchens as people made coffee and invited people in to talk and to talk and to talk. And they really helped us with this. That's how I first, I came to Metro Center a little later as I retired from the school superintendency, but that's how I first became interacted with Dr. Miller and later with Metro Center.
Wow. So again, the advocacy and the parent engagement.
Yes,
right
and it was interesting to hear Dr. Doucet say that, because that was really my first, it had nothing to do with training at that time. It was, come help us talk to these parents. They're going to, they're going to run over me one day.
All right. Well, again, speaking about youth, NYU Metro Center's work focuses on youth who have been historically marginalized in educational spaces. In order to ground this conversation, we'd first like to start by defining a few essential terms. Dr. Doucet, can you help us get started by explaining what is meant by equity and school transformation?
Those are really great questions. So I think of equity in at least two ways. One is sort of what I would call the ground floor definition, the basic definition, which is that, students, people need different things in order to be able to accomplish the things that we need to accomplish. When we're thinking about students, we're thinking about their success in schools. Students need different things to be successful in schools. And equity is ensuring that students have access to those things that they need in order to be successful. Another aspect of equity is sort of going one step beyond that, which is not just acknowledging that students need different things and that we need to access and give them those things, but that we need to be working really hard and consistently and sort of, without letting up, to ensure that students are getting what they need on a consistent basis, that we are working to advocate on their behalf on a consistent basis, that we are not just sort of paying lip service to the idea that, different learners need different things. So we really want to make sure that we are paying attention to policies, practices, institutional culture, ideology, all of these things that, comprise the different systems that we exist within. And so making sure that we are putting all of those things, keeping all of those things front and center as we think about people who have traditionally not experienced equitable access, equitable opportunities, equitable outcomes.
Okay. So when we mention a term like school transformation, what is the aim?
Right. Well, I always joke around that my dear colleague, mentor, beloved Pedro, when I say the name of the Metro Center, I say you can tell a guy named it, right? Because it has this long name and it's super lofty in its goals. But I absolutely love it. And yes, it's a tall order to say that we want to transform schools. But the fact of the matter is that although we have traditionally approached the quote unquote problem of student achievement as if there's something wrong with the students, as if the students are broken, their families are broken, their communities are broken. In fact, it's our schools that are broken. We have not provided school environments and settings that are meant for young people to thrive. We just haven't. Not all young people, right? Maybe some small portion of young people, but we have not created spaces that are meant for all students to be able to thrive. And so when we talk about school transformation, what we mean is flipping things on their head, not things being school centric and it's all about what the school wants and needs and how the school wants parents to interact and how the school wants, but it's really about putting that power in the hands of the students and their families and the community to say, what do we envision? What do we imagine? And what do we want to see for our schools? And that is truly transformative.
No, absolutely, absolutely. If you allow me 1 second, I want to double back. You mentioned Dr. Pedro Noguera a few times, and again, the importance of what prioritizing equity is. I'd be remiss if I didn't take a moment to mention NYU Metro Center's Prioritizing Equity Conference happening this June 2nd, just a few weeks away, and where the aforementioned Dr. Pedro Noguera, former NYU Metro Center Executive Director, will be the keynote speaker. So please, you'll see a lot of information on our homepage. So please be sure to stop and engage with that and register, join us for this type of conversation about what is most important in education. Dr. Gray, NYU Metro Center was born of a dream of achieving equity in public education. Founded in 1978 by Dr. Lamar P. Miller, the vision was to examine and find solutions for problems facing the country's public schools, especially as they affect low-income and minority children. Dr. Gray, what problems were public schools facing in the late 1970s and early 1980s?
Well, if you look at that period of time, first of all, Dr. Miller had been the director of the institute. I believe it was called no, it wasn't called that. There was an institute that he had come from Michigan and had come to NYU, both as the director of that center, but also as the chair of the secondary education in teaching and learning. And Dr. Miller felt very strongly that NYU's presence in the New York City public schools was missing, particularly its School of Education. Now, he didn't mean that the good professors weren't doing good research. He didn't mean that. He meant that there was not any evidence of the imprint of NYU's capabilities in the New York City public schools. And so the first name was, and I forget the first name, and I know it so well because that's where I came in. And it was Dr. Noguera who did change the name, and actually there was a slight shift. So let me just go back to the issue. The issue then was not necessarily school desegregation, although that became a very big part of our funding. But the issue were the way that the center started. I must tell you that the dean at the time actually provided the seed money for the Metro Center. I must tell you that this center grew out of faculty engagement. Now, later on, the faculty wasn't as involved because this was Dr. Miller's vision was very much an action-oriented center. going into schools, doing the work. You know, we had a school to prison pipeline thing that was called Stay in Schools. It was not called School to Prison then. Uh, and so he began the center with what he called 4 areas: adolescent education, teaching and learning to sustain vulnerable youth, equity issues, and organizational and policy development. Kept that, but that was all going to be as a result of action research, not necessarily the formal research. And so he began the center, interestingly enough, with 2 key program components. One in youth, which is still there, Pat Ryan's center. And that actually came because also about the same time came the new president of the university, who had put that funding through in the federal government. So that was one center, but the second was teaching and teaching. And so he got a federal grant from the government for a teacher corps. And it was one of the first teacher corps in the country. And that was just, then came from what I call the big years. 1954 was Brown. It was really 1968, 69, 1970s, all the way through the 80s that we were dealing with this phenomenon called school desegregation that tore the country apart. It particularly tore the South apart, but that's another whole political situation that's fun to talk about. But Dr. Miller was able to achieve one of the first grants of what was called the Desegregation Assistance Centers. And that's where a lot of work went on, just unbelievable work. I can remember driving to a town, Hamilton Township in New Jersey, and the 3 areas that this centers dealt with, these are the names, by the way. This is what the centers are: race, sex, not feminine, not in there, race, sex, and national origin. Now, national origin dealt with language minority students. I still like the name rather than all the names we've come up with, but that's because I'm old and I have seen so much change and I just see it coming around. But at any rate, so the issues then became teaching again, youth programs, and he began to put in lots of youth. 4 of them are still at the center, I believe. Pat Ryan's is still there. Liberty Partnership is still there. There are 2 more. I think there are 4 that are still there.
We only have those 2 active
Okay.
right now.
Okay.
One of them, the Excel program.
Yes.
Yes, the Excel program has sunsetted.
Okay.
And then I don't know about a 4th one. That might have
Okay.
been.
Well, I'd have to look at my notes. But anyway, so the issues were quality teaching and learning for these youngsters in the schools, the stay in school, the whole business of school dropouts, and of course, school desegregation, and all that goes with that. Okay. Does that answer your question?
No, it does. It does. It's Fabienne, in terms of how would you compare those offerings with the work the Metro Center is currently involved in 2023?
Well, you know, I'm proud to say and glad to say that that work continues very valiantly. We no longer are today's nomenclature, Equity Assistance Center, although we would love to be again. And so we actually have reapplied, and maybe someday we'll be able to hold that again. But Metro is this really fascinating sort of assemblage or collective of multiple subunits that, you know, we loosely call them centers, or we call them subunits, whatever the case may be. And each one has an area of focus, but these fall under the same sort of things that Dr. Gray is talking about. So we do have the youth work. We do have the action research. We have work that's focused on students with disabilities. We have work that's focused on language learners, a lot of teacher professional development and technical assistance, but all around the issues of equity. And we do also have work around desegregation. and integration, on just lots of these kind of these problems in education that have persisted for, you know, for all these decades, right? Despite the fact that Brown, you know, was a big victory at the time, we are still very much in these times of highly segregated schools. So still having to actively work on that. I mean, Dr. Gray, just hearing you talk about Dr. Miller helping with these parents made me think of our very own Matt Gonzalez,
Yes.
who is leading our Education, Justice, Research, and Organizing Collaborative team. And how, so my kids went to PS 315, the East Village Community School. And last year they moved buildings, and they were merging with another school. And this had become, when my son first started in pre-K there, it was a very racially mixed school. But by the time my daughter was leaving in 5th grade, it was a very gentrified school. It had become very white, much to the chagrin of the school leadership. And they were integrating with another school in the East Village that was really suffering because of low numbers. So they sort of merged their schools, but that school was
Enrollment.
right. And that was a primarily Black and brown school. And, you know, there were some concerns from the parents in that community of this white school coming in. And, you know, like absolutely rightfully so, right? They absolutely, you know, earned that mistrust. And so this school leader, the principal, who is a dear friend, Bradley Goodman, reached out to me and was sort of like, you know, is there anything that you can do? And I was like, I got you. And I said, Matt, we got to help this, you know, this is a great school. PS 350 is a great community. Bradley's a great leader, and they really need help figuring out how to do this integration thing. We want to go from desegregation to integration, but it doesn't happen smoothly. It's not just a matter of putting kids in the same building and suddenly everything is okay. And so hearing, you know, that this is the work that Dr. Miller was doing, and now here we have Matt doing that same work of sitting with people and talking and talking and talking. That's the way that we get through these situations.
I just wanted to say that Dr. Miller just felt so very strongly about this. He always wanted the link between New York and schools, not just the discussion, not and when I'll tell you what really happened by the time Pedro got there, because I know what the transition was. I was there. Pedro really moved the center. First of all, there was not a lot of faculty involved. I mean, active faculty involvement. We did have, in the teaching space, we did have a wonderful program by a young science faculty member whose discipline was science, that was funded by the state. But what began to happen is funds began to dry up, quite frankly, from the federal government. At the time that Ronald Reagan, at the time that he became president and thereafter, there was not much attention to these quote unquote, what we now call social justice issues. There just wasn't. The federal government was not doing that. And in fact, when Ronald Reagan came in, he just put a clamp down on everything. I believe, in fact, I'll just tell you this short story. I went to Washington for a grant to talk to a program officer, and Reagan had just begun, and his ed department had just begun. And this is, you know, can you look this up? I hope you can. But it's pretty factual in my head and with me. And the people who came in just destroyed copies and copies of stuff. Some of the stuff that had happened was gone. And program officers were very sad because these are civil servants. These are not appointees, but the appointees came in. So some history was lost. But when Dr. Noguera came in, there was a shift. There was a shift from the federal government. And so Dr. Noguera began this notion of continuing Dr. Miller's work. And I got to tell you, just as somebody watching this, it was so wonderful to see the respect for the work that Dr. Miller had done and how he would carry it through and extend it. It was just a wonderful thing to see, because often that doesn't happen. I'm coming in and I'm going to do my thing. That was not Dr. Noguera. He valued Dr. Miller's work, which had been historic work, by the way, at NYU. And so he began to call on foundations. He began to bring in faculty, more and more faculty, more and more faculty to do some of these things, which was a transformation in and of itself. Not that faculty wouldn't have been, but remember, in my judgment, remember I come from the public school sector. So in my judgment, faculty is busy doing its research and its graduate students are doing its research. Lamar had no real interest in that. He wanted the work done in the schools immediately. And using research, yes, but using practical people who were in the schools, et cetera, to make a long story short. So he began to use more faculty, different kinds of programs, but many staying within the same vein. And I just want to tell you one other thing about how he continued this business about going to schools and taking an issue on. Arlene Ackerman was superintendent of schools in Philadelphia. And there had been this horrible situation that Arlene had handled very badly. And I say Arlene because I knew her well. We were all superintendents at the same time. And there had been a horrible situation in one of the schools where the Black students had taken on the Asian students, not the fights like we find today, not fist knives, not guns, but fist knives and sticks. And so the federal government remembered Metro Center and called Pedro in and his team to go in there and yes, to do some evaluation of what's the situation, but really to tamp that down and to do it in such a way so that Pedro was very well aware of these kinds of things that needed to be done, but he brought in a sterling group of faculty members like yourself to do some other things and built, to some extent, a larger research presence in the center.
Dr. Doucet, I guess to that point, what is the advantage or the strength in having that research presence at the center?
My goodness, you couldn't have set me up better with that question. So I am, so I'll say a couple of things. One is that for 3 years, I took a leave from NYU and worked as a program officer at the William T. Grant Foundation, which is a foundation in New York City that supports, it's a research foundation that supports research on youth ages 5 to 25 and is really all about, kind of like the best outcomes and thriving for youth. And one of the focus areas at the foundation is improving the use of research evidence. And when I tell you that for my entire career, I was always sort of like, yes, we're doing this research and it's interesting, but can it, where does it live? Like, how does it actually come to life? Beyond the pages of a journal, how do we do work that actually matters for people in their lives? And my, at the time, the VP of program at the foundation, Vivian Zen, who is now actually president of the Foundation for Child Development, used to say, we didn't go into research thinking, I'm just going to go and just sit around and write papers. We went into research because we wanted to help people. We wanted to make a difference in the world. And yet in our training, we are not really taught or trained on how to make our work accessible, usable, relevant. And I was able to do a lot of work and thinking and writing there around how to use critical lenses, critical theoretical lenses like critical race theory and Black feminism and other kind of lenses to even build up that idea of research use. And part of it is, in order for the research to be useful, it has to be research that is anti-racist. Because what we have currently is a lot of research that does that same thing that I was saying before about blaming kids and blaming families and blaming communities, and research that just sort of reinforces our societal beliefs instead of research that recognizes strengths, research that recognizes all of the resources that are available in communities, all the things that they bring to the table, all the ways in which they are able to thrive and survive despite everything else. And so what the reason why we really need research is we need the work to inform our practices. We need the research to inform our policies, but they really must go hand in hand. And yes. I'm also loving what I'm seeing happening now and more in the academy, which is my younger colleagues absolutely not being willing to sit down and wait to do research that is engaged in community. They want to be engaged in community right, right from the door, actually as graduate students, right? They want to do research that is engaged. And so I'm really pleased to see also that NYU is really beginning to understand and recognize and be more supportive of research practice partnerships and other kinds of research that involves, is participatory and really involves the community, involves young people. This is really what we need. We need for these things to be married to one another, because while our incredible, amazing colleagues are out there in the field every day, working with the teachers in the schools, with the students, we also need to provide them with what are the best resources? What do we know? What are some of the ways that things can really move, what are things that really move the needle? We need research to do that, because research is looking at things from a broader scale, but they have to be in tandem, in conversation with each other.
I couldn't agree more. And of course, that's where Metro has, in my judgment, has evolved. Not that there was, the beginning of it, I am amazed at what Lamar Miller did in changing the climate and the tone in teaching and learning. I just am. He just did. And then Pedro, and Pedro, by the way, was not my mentor. He was my boss at one point. But he actually has just written a review of some work that I've just done. He's a favorite of mine.
Well, Dr. Gray, a moment ago, you mentioned Brown versus Board of Education. I guess my question to you is, why did the Metro Center begin its 4-decade tracking of the 1954 Supreme Court decision, Brown versus Board of Education, through a series of national invitational conferences?
Lamar writes in a piece that we did on Brown plus 50, and I just want to read this to you because I think it's quite, he said that he vividly recalls the morning of May 17th, 1954. I was in a social studies class when, this is May 17th, 1954, when the professor entered the classroom and said, "The Supreme Court has made a momentous decision that you will never forget," he recalled. And he was inspired by the Brown decision ruling, and he forever kept that at his heart. And what he felt that he wanted the NYU to do, and he did Brown press 20, Brown press 30. I did for him, in concert with he and Pedro, 40, 50, and 60. I'm not going to do 70. I didn't even know I would be around at 70. But Brown is important in all of this conversation. Well, it does not matter. And I want to just read to you what Robert Carter said, who actually argued the case that day. He actually argued with the Oliver Brown. Yes, it was Thurgood Marshall, whom all the young people, all the young pundits, they said, Thurgood did not argue that case. Thurgood was in charge of the 5 jurists who worked on Brown. But Robert Carter says, people ask him, why didn't the NAACP just do the building thing? In other words, in facilities. Why not just that? Why not equal facilities? So that the young girl who came out of Prince George's County said, we're not going to live in these tar shacks anymore. So Carter, by the way, was alive. He became a Supreme Court judge here in New York, and he was alive. But this is something he wrote in Michigan, and he says, the strategy was to attack segregation in education, but the goal, the real agenda, was the removal of the basic barrier to full and equal citizenship rights for Blacks in this country. With segregation eliminated, Blacks, it was thought, would have an unrestricted opportunity to function in America. Didn't happen. Carter goes on to talk about they didn't realize the racism was as deep as it was. And that's, by the way, something that I write about in a book that's being released on June 1st. But he made the most significant point. Browns could be no longer sublimated to the states, could no longer be sublimated to the states. We could not be down. forever and forever. Now that, you know how that worked out, transportation, the whole thing. But the other thing that's important about that is that a lot flowed from Brown, and Carter says that they were disappointed. Had they known, they might have done some other things. They were disappointed that the integration or desegregation, it depends on how you want to flip it. I have come to the belief that it's going to have to be looked at very differently in this day and age, very differently. And I don't know if Matt Gonzalez agrees with this, but I'm not so sure that we want to talk about it in the way we talked about it in the past. And that's another whole story. But that's how Brown was so significant, and Lamar felt so strongly. He understood. He got to know Judge Carter very well, and he understood the significance of Brown. And in 70, I think it's going to have to look a little. I don't know what the conference will be like. You guys are doing. I'll be glad to give you some ideas, but at any rate, since I did 40, 50, 60, but that's why. And so Brown has become, and what's beginning to happen, just as Matt Gonzalez, and I think you, Dr. Cranston, you first, the other person, I think you guys have begun to look at it also. I think that Brown can never be forgotten. I think Carter is right and Lamar is right. No, it was much more than school desegregation. Blacks are no longer supplicants in this country. So my book, I wrote a book that's being released on June 1st that looks at school desegregation through the eyes of the bully pulpit of 7 US presidents during that time, the 70s through 89 and Ronald Reagan. And I add another lens to what school desegregation might look like.
Well, we are excited to see that, Dr. Gray. That's amazing. And also, let me just say how happy I am that you are still around 70 plus 70.
I failed in a sense, failed retirement, haven't I?
That happens to smart people like you.
No. Okay.
Beyond the idea that Brown holds such significance today, is that a positive or negative?
It's positive. Do you understand what it's like to be a supplicant? The state tells you where to eat, where to live. They still tell you where to live sometimes. Where to eat, where to live, what to eat sometimes. They do that too sometimes. Where to go to school. Not only where to go to school, almost where to go to church. I couldn't, listen, let me just give you this. I am not going to give you my age, but I'm old. I was not born with my true rights. I was not. I was not born with the right to vote. My daughter is 54. She is the first person in our family of 7 generations in this country. The first group, her age group, is the first of 7 generations in this country who were born with their full rights, which came in 1964-65 with the voting rights. I was not born with the right to vote. I mean, I was born to vote if I could count the beans, but do you understand what I'm saying? So Brown is of great significance. We're no longer supplicants to the state. And what's scary about what's going on right now and what happened I'm sorry, if you just let me say this, it's not part of what happened with the Supreme Court decision is that if I left it to the states, I'd have 15 states who would make decisions about my body completely as a supplicant, completely. And for Blacks, by the way, the federal government has been the only place we could go because during that period of time, we couldn't go to the states. That's why Brown is significant. Not because it was going to put white kids and Black kids sitting together.
No, I absolutely agreed. I guess maybe I was inarticulate in asking the question. In terms of the idea that, I think if Dr. Doucet mentioned it earlier, the idea that we're still having discussions about traditionally marginalized groups. We're still talking about the challenges that Black and Brown students face in those same spaces, education, housing, and the likes of. So of course, we full agreement that Brown is one of the most significant pieces of legislation ever. But I guess, am I too naive in assuming that we'd have even more progress? And so I guess really that point.
I think
the
if
idea-
Dr. Doucet would take a stab at that, and then I will just a bit later, and I'm going to say something that might be just a little off track, but go ahead.
No, I understand the question, Pharaoh. I often ask myself the same thing about so many of the gains that we have made as a society and different marginalized group, the gains that we've made as women, the gains that we've made as people of color, you know, these different, and then it seemed like these things are being rolled back, especially nowadays. It really feels like these things are coming under attack. But I think the fact that it happened, even if people are actively trying to undo it, they can't undo the fact that it happened. So it's sort of like once Pandora is out of the box, it's out of the box. So you can try to put segments and you can try to sort of, but it's out. And so people have always fought for freedom, right? People, that's part of like what makes us human beings, is that we are not, human beings are not interested in being subjugated. Human beings want to be free. And I'm speaking as a descendant of Haitian revolutionaries who were not willing, to be enslaved. And so this is part of, I think, our human condition, right? We have some of those things are not great, some of those things are really great, which is that we want to be free. And so I think that the gains that have been made over these decades around people fighting for their freedoms and being able to sort of even crack the door open, it just can't ever be the same again, right? It's like you're not going to step in the same river twice. It's always going to keep moving, despite things seeming like they're not really moving.
I think I would agree with that. And I also think that there is something significant about understanding how human nature works. At some point, and I may not live to see it, at some point, there's going to be a group of people who said, we're tired of this. Enough. We're just not going to do confrontation anymore. We're just not going to do this anymore. We're going to do something different. And those are the shifts. That was a shift in the 60s. I'm tired of this. We're not going to do it anymore. It caused great grief, great strife. But there's one other thing, and I don't have answers for this, so I'm not at Metro anymore, so I don't have to help find answers. I can just say it and say, I also think we need to talk about language a bit more and how we use it. The original centers were called Desegregation Assistance Centers, DACs. And it was actually Lamar Miller who got the feds to change it to Equity Assistance Centers. And by the way, one of the other huge grants we had that he brought in was the New York Technical Assistance Center, which was on its way to school transformation. So that, that's what I mean by Pedro, just expanding it. I want to just suggest something, and if I can get this out of my head, I talked to you a bit, Dr. Cranston, but I can't explain it. I don't have it straight. But it came to me that because one of the things that happened during school desegregation in Lyndon Johnson's work, it actually began a little bit with Lyndon, but it really began to shift with Ford, where the language of school desegregation changed to quality education. And the NAACP said, you're trying to get rid of this argument, and it shifted. Also, money came, and I was an assistant school who got dollars and dollars and dollars and dollars for New Rochelle under Title I. Because all of a sudden, we weren't talking about school desegregation. We were talking about these victims who didn't have the teacher role models because 33,000 had been let go. Or we were talking about, and all of a sudden, Black kids, and to some extent, Latin kids, and I'm going to use that word because I want to talk about two language changes. Kids who are Latino or were others who might have been immigrants into the country, their language is not English. All of a sudden, these became, even among teachers, interestingly enough, poor children, or in other words, it was a fascinating shift. It was a shift in the way these youngsters were looked at. They were now no longer capable of quality education. We've got to go in and do something about that. It's no longer about school desegregation. And that seemed to have been a deliberate move starting with Ford and absolutely ended with Richard Nixon. Not Richard Nixon, with Ronald Reagan. Now, the truth of the matter is, as I said to you, if I could flip the word poverty, what I now call poverty med, and do something different with it, it would be something like this. Every time I hear somebody say, I grew up in the projects and I came from a single parent family, and they're saying it with a badge of honor. And I want to say so badly, yeah, there are just thousands of you. You're not the exception. That there are thousands of you who came out of the projects, who've done great work. But in the mind, when you said, all of a sudden, people see you as something else. Something else. Now, if that might be a long way. And Dr. Doucet, if you've got anybody on your staff who wants to do some real work on this, what would happen? Because right now, when people say that, I can guarantee you, if there are 20 people in the room, 15 kind of say, oh, he's an exception, she's an exception. Yeah. And the other fact is that there are more white folks who live in the projects than there are Black folks. Even if they live in separate projects, they come out. I mean, J.D. Vance, bless his sweetheart, I do not like him. And I'm sorry, he's a senator from Ohio. But I can say what I say. I don't work at Metro anymore. But the truth of the matter, J.D. Vance comes out of wherever he comes out of, with a gun-toting grandmother that he praises. And when his family, when the companies opened up, in Detroit, et cetera, the companies went to Appalachia and got those white folks and brought them to work. We had to struggle to get there. But their poverty is not quite the same. J.D. Vance went to Yale. He's now a senator. I just wish there was some way to change this perception and language. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's saying so much, because I think part of it, at least, is that there's an automatic jump to the conclusion that if you say projects, that nothing good could come out of the projects. So if something good comes out of the projects, it must be some exception, as opposed to, again, rather than deficit lenses, saying, yes, there are projects, but man, those people love each other. They look out for each other. Don't let any kid be, on the street when they're not supposed to be, because they're going to get put right back in their place and brought home. All these things that are actually strengths of those communities, of the fact that they bring each other food, that they help each other pay rent, that they support. Those things become, they disappear, and they are not seen as part of the fabric of what would support someone to be able to come out of the projects and say, and I am going to, continue to push and fight, because I grew up in this community where I was loved, where I was held. Yes, there were some things that were going on that, were not so great, but I was protected. I had, covering of the elders in my community who wanted to see things turn out well for me, who called me out when I was doing things that I wasn't supposed to do. All those things are like single mothers. People, again, it's like automatically people think of, well, you're supposed to have two, and so if you have one, then that must be a negative, as opposed to thinking, man, what do you learn about being scrappy and about being tough and about, going for it and multitasking and being amazing when you are doing it as one and watching somebody who's doing it as one? All we're thinking is, well, something is missing. We're not thinking, what does it add? What does it add to grow up in these conditions? What does it add to have that type of, upbringing?
And see, I think that's impacting our public schools when we have so many. And so that I would just like to change the language of the conversation. And if I were younger, I'd try to do that research. And if I find a way to find a center or some money for I don't know if the feds would give it to me now, or give it to us, or give it to anybody, or a foundation, to really take a look at this. Because I think part of our issue in our democratic society is how we have used language, quite frankly.
No, very, very much. The intentionality of the thoughts and what becomes, what does that mean? What is attached to it without even saying it? No, thank you both. I've been negligent about engaging our Q&A question and answer portal here in our discussion. Dr. Gray, your favorite son here, Matt Gonzalez, appreciates your words of wisdom greatly.
Okay, thank you.
I guess we're almost closing out our discussion, but I would like to invite everyone to send a question to the Q&A. We'll try to include as many as we possibly can. Dr. Doucet, a question for you. In this current moment, with a host of anti-equity efforts about, with restrictions and bans, what is the role of the Metro Center in this quite challenging contemporary moment?
Woo. Well, we have a lot of work to do, don't we? We have, I think, the beauty of being a collective where people have different areas of strength and different areas of focus means that we can actually work on multiple fronts. So I had mentioned earlier the Education, Justice, Research, and Organizing Collaborative. They are doing work that they're actually working with parent groups to develop strategies and to develop, you know, the advocacy skills and the organizing strategies in order to fight in their states and their communities where they're coming up against all of these restrictions and, you know, book bans and all these other things. They are actually, you know, with funding, getting small grants that are being, you know, funneled via Metro Center and with the work of Megan Hester to work with these groups and say, you know, here's how we are going to help you, you know, fight in your community against these things. We have a group that is a group for white parents that Barbara Gross is leading, working with white parents who are, you know, in public schools and want to not be the nice white parents of the famous podcast, the nice white public school parents, but actually be white parents who are allies, white parents who are advocates, who are able to, you know, use their privilege on behalf of those more marginalized communities. We have groups that are working with young people, you know, our partner organizations that are working with young people who are actually themselves advocating and working and fighting, you know, all these different forces that are working against us. So I really think that it's a combination of things that we can do. I think that all of us have something to contribute, you know, whether it's speaking to different organizations and helping them to sort of see the possibilities. Like I gave a talk to Texans for Democracy. You know, they were feeling quite demoralized, and hopefully, you know, I was able to give them a little bit of encouragement and boost in how they can strategize. What are some of the different strategies that they can take? And one of those things, I think, is we really need to be encouraging progressive parents to get on school boards. You know, school boards are being overtaken by a lot of conservative parents and who are, you know, not just conservative for the sake of being conservative, because whatever, you know, be conservative, but conservative and actually harmful, right? And literally actively working to harm children who don't look like, you know, who are not white, who are not middle class, you know, all the things, right? Who don't fit into these kind of the mainstream. You know, we need parents on those school boards who can who will, you know, run for the school board and sit on the school board and be a voice to be a counter narrative to these ideas that critical race theory is being taught in school, or that, you know, we need to ban these books because these books are being harmful, or we need to, you know, we need to not use words like gay, or we need to, you know, harm trans children, like all these different things. We need parents who can be on these things and say, like, this is not the way, right? This is really not the way. The way to liberation, the way to freedom is not to, you know, punch down. It's really to make space for everybody to have space to be able to thrive and be able to move, and like we all benefit from that.
Yeah, we do. I'm checking the Q&A here. There's a great question. I'm so jealous. I wish I had asked it myself. What is your biggest hope for the Metro Center as it moves into its 45th year?
Is that Dr. Doucet? I'm sure. I have a
Yes.
hope. Yeah.
I would love to hear your answer to that question too, Dr. Gray. I actually really would. So for me, I think, first of all, as you all have heard, we have an incredible legacy. NYU Metro Center, the work that Dr. Miller did was truly visionary and groundbreaking. The work that Norm Fruchter, who we recently lost as a champion of education, working in tandem with Metro Center, with Dr. Miller, we have such an incredible legacy that we have inherited. And one of the things that when I say it jokingly, I say, look, I just don't want to break the place, right? I don't want to come here and break it. I just want to keep the work going and not be the one to have, for people to say, well, when she came on board, everything went to hell. That's the joking part. But the real part is that I really do hope that we can sort of take this legacy of people who we have seen actively working steadily to improve conditions for children who, without the voices of advocates, would be left on the margins, would be left to languish in classrooms that are not meant for their thriving, that we can really just continue to work to improve that. So I have ideas for programming and those kinds of things, but I think that's sort of like to be expected, right? To be expected that we would be able to bring in some more of those federal grants to be able to do more of this work, bring in more opportunities to do technical assistance with school districts and all those kinds of things. But in addition to that, or I guess underlying that, at the root of that is really being able to stay the course, right? Is really to just continue the work that was laid down before us, and to continue and just keep at it. I guess I feel like the best way that we can honor the memories of these folks whose shoulders that we stand on is to keep on working for those things that we share. We share their vision, and we want to keep at it.
I think what you said is great, but look at you. You're full of energy, full of synergy, and it shows. And you're enthusiastic. So what I hope you will do is to, yes, continue the legacy, but I hope you will also use that synergy, energy that you show, and the enthusiasm that you show, to begin to think about what else you might add, because I'm sure you have something else to add. Might take you some time to do that, but you should do that. You really should. Lyndon Johnson once said, there comes a time when you just have to put your stack in. That's how you're going to stack in. And when that time comes, think about what stack you want to put in.
Dr. Gray, Dr. Gray, Dr. Gray.
Yes.
Oh, well, one more question for you, actually from Matt Gonzalez. Dr. Gray, what do you think about New York City Schools Chancellor
David Banks?
Yes, and the question is tied to the integration piece. Dismissing integration and the harms of segregation. How do we push back and pull towards?
Okay, Matt, I have an article for you. And it's really a great article. And the reason that I want, there has been such a pull by Black folks, basically Black folks, and I want to say something here. We've got to figure out whether we're talking about race or ethnicity or whatever, because the demographics of who's going to be in this country in the next 10 years is shifting. And so the Southeast Asians are coming in. Are they brown? How do we deal with this? How do we deal with this? But Blacks themselves kind of got very, what's the word? I need the right word. Disenchanted with school segregation, school desegregation and integration. We've gone through that period and we may still be in it. The loss of teachers, just so many kinds of things. And David Banks, when he said it was not going to be a priority, I found interesting. Because if you look at what his reason was, it's back to the same old thing. Our kids went to those schools, they were hostile. We still get that. I get it from middle-class Black folks who send their kids to private schools. It's not a safe environment. It's in terms of their psyche. So we're going to have to do some hard thinking about what we mean about integration. We really are. First of all, I want to tell you, I honestly believe the DNA of America is race. And when it's race, they made it up. It's color. We're going to have to deal with that. And of color doesn't do it. It just doesn't. These are my opinions, guys. This is not some, but Matt, the article is called, it's January 12th, 2023. And I'll put it in the chat later, or I'll text it to you, Matt. But it's called, Is the Fight for School Integration Still Worthwhile for African Americans? It's worth reading because integration does not mean sitting next to somebody. It's integration, all aspects of our society, our cultures, our people. And we've got such confusion going on about it. And we've got to straighten that out. And that may be some work. I mean, in just kind of defining, what do we now mean? What do we mean of color? I mean, I'm sorry to raise it. I know it's the thing to do, it's the thing to say, but is that appropriation? What is that? Sorry. So I think, Matt, that David Banks is interesting, but he's kind of, well, I think this article will kind of explain where his head is. Okay, thank you.
All right, so Dr. Gray, again, more well wishes. And again, thanks coming from question and answer section about challenging us in terms of the way we use language. As the moments tick down and away, I come back to both the panelists and ask for your final thoughts, comments, as we conclude our conversation this evening. Dr. Gray, we'll start with you.
Well, I'm grateful for your asking me. At my age, it means that maybe I still have something to say. I had a great run at Metro. I've had a great career. I really have. I come out of East Texas, the worst part of Texas, the most meanest, horrible, awful Texas. At night, there was a sign in most of the towns we would go to, "Niggas don't come here after dark." I grew up with that. However, let me tell you that my mother absolutely taught us not to hate. And so it steeled me. And so I have hope. I am just absolutely still hopeful. I really do. And I do think progress has been made. Not as much as we want, but maybe we have to look at a lot of other things. So thank you for having me. I have hope. Thank you, Dr. Doucet. I'm so happy you're there. I'm so happy you're there. Lamar would be proud. And I know Pedro
Thank
already
you
is.
so much. Yes, thank you so much. That's really kind. Thank you. I did see some other notes in the chat. So one was asking how to help at Metro Center. So Lucy is a parent who's asking, a parent leader and advocate, and wants to help parents. Please reach out to us. Please. So if you go to the Metro website, you can, stay in touch with us and click the link to send us an email and just, let us know that you are interested in getting involved, and we will find a way to get you involved. Believe you me, there is plenty for you to do. So, and we would love to have that kind of support. We have community partners that are doing work. And so, yeah, absolutely. Just reach out to us and we'll be happy to plug you in. And then I also want to, note this comment from Vanessa Rodriguez, who is Dr. Rodriguez is over at the NYU Langone School of Medicine, and posted this comment appreciating, Dr. Gray, your thoughts on the use of language. Often, Dr. Rodriguez says, I often advocate for changing the common way we talk about the work we do with teachers. Commonly, it is said that in the field of education, we train teachers to serve children and families, and we observe their effectiveness. Train, serve, and observe is the language of oppression and slavery, the overseer on the field. I strongly believe this language is intentional because the workforce is dominated by women. And I am proud and happy to say that Dr. Rodriguez is one of our faculty affiliates at the NYU Metro Center. Right. So we have a lot of fire here and, a lot of really important work that is being done. Dr. Rodriguez is doing some really beautiful research and work to support teachers of color. And we really do need we really do need these shifts in language. We really do need to examine and think about the way that our language impacts the way that we move, the way that we live and move, and the things that we take for granted when we don't reflect on that. So I really appreciate that comment. And just overall appreciate all my colleagues. I'm so thankful for all of you who have joined us, to listen in. I appreciate those of you who are already collaborating with us. Welcome those of you who want to collaborate with us to please get in touch, and we'll get you into some kind of good trouble if you reach out to us. And I'm just really, really grateful for Dr. Gray. They're so thankful for your wisdom and your knowledge. Just the wealth of goodness that you bring.
It's called getting old.
Well, you know what? In that case, I'll be happy to get old too, because it is truly beautiful. And I'm so grateful for it. And just thank you for everything that you have done to keep NYU Metro Center going all these years, and just everything that you've done to be a mentor to so many people here. I know so many people here, Maria, Matt, and others consider you a dear mentor. And we are just really grateful for that.
Thank you.
Panelists, for your insights today. Thank you for our audience for joining us. We truly appreciate you being here. After this conversation, we hope that you were empowered and better prepared to go out into the world and make that good trouble. Thank you again. As we conclude today's webinar, be well and take care.
You too. Take care. Bye-bye.